Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Biocognition and Breath, Cultivating Health and Longevity, happened on April 26, 2022, as a science and spirituality dialogue with Mario Martinez, Willa Blythe Baker, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series on bring body, speech, and mind to life. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everyone, to Cyber Sangha, this wonderful space that Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche created. And this year, as some of you know, we're focusing on bringing body, speech, and mind to life. And amongst the many things that we do every month, we do our full moon practice. And so with that, you're always invited to join. And what's beautiful about that is people from around the world guided in different languages. So we start in the US, we go to Finland, we go to Spain, and so many other places. So you're more than welcome to join us. And the next one, I believe, is May 16th. Also, Rinpoche does different kinds of dialogues. So for example, on April 30th, he'll bring the 5 Tibetan traditions together. And so again, I invite you to join us there. And sometimes different practices that he himself guides, sometimes on body, on speech or breath, and on mind. Now, today we start with a second year of dialogues. Actually, we started last month with the body. And for the body, some of you may remember, we had Drs. Bessel van der Kolk and Drs. Eve Ekman. And it was a very wonderful dialogue with Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Today, we're going to talk about breath, and particularly biocognition and breath, cultivating health and longevity, because we have 2 wonderful speakers and good friends. So I'll start introducing them and welcome you all to get to meet them both personally and what they do for work and how breath can be important in the ways that they help us bring it to our lives. So I'll start with Willa. So Dr. Willa Baker, her PhD is in Tibetan studies, and she's also a Dharma teacher, a Lama. She's the founder and spiritual co-director of Natural Dharma Fellowship in Boston, Massachusetts, and a wonderful retreat center called Wonderwell Mountain Refuge in Springfield, New Hampshire. She's author of many books. I really recommend you this last one, The Wakeful Body. I was just reading it, and the subtitle is Somatic Mindfulness as Path to Freedom. But there she brings a lot of different aspects of breath and how breath can be important in the different kinds of breathing. She does guide meditation retreats, primarily in the Northeast of the US. And she's also a fellow with the the Mind and Life Institute. And her PhD in Tibetan studies is from Harvard University. Joining Willa and Rinpoche, it'll be Mario Martinez, a doctor in psychology. And he's a clinical neuropsychologist who specializes in how cultural beliefs affect health and longevity. He has incredible research showing how longevity is learned and how those causes of health are inherited and how culturally we can actually make sure that we do live longer. He was sharing some things of his own experiences and I let him share those with you all. A lot of it is he translates things from both genetics and psychology. And he's the author of this other wonderful book, The Mind Body, or the Body Mind Code. And the subtitle is How to Change the Beliefs That Limit Your Health, Longevity, and Success. So this is really crucial. How we change those limiting beliefs, something that Rinpoche talks a lot about as well. And really how what he calls biocognition really has a lot to do with breathing and the memories of breath. And so I look forward to this wonderful dialogue. I'll just say a word of Rinpoche. I know Rinpoche doesn't want me to talk too much about him, but he is the founder of Cyber Sangha, and really we couldn't do all this without you and the whole team that you put together. Milos as in the technical side, Polly and Ellen, as well as Mariela and others. So thank you everyone for helping us put this together. And Rinpoche has been trained, for those who don't know him, has been trained in Menri Monastery in India, son of Tibetan refugees, and then came to the West. And since the last 30 years, teaching in the West in all these different ways, including knowing how technology can affect us positively, besides all the things that we think of many times negatively. So thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Willa. Thank you, Mario, for being with us this morning. Or for some might be early morning, late, almost lunch, and for some might be afternoon. So welcome all. So let me start, as I usually like to start, with a little bit of personal part. So kind of letting the audience know who you are and what brought you to this fabulous work that you're doing. So of course, women first. So Willa, if you can tell us, what brought you to this work and the path that you've been coming into this wonderful work?
Well, first, just thank you so much, Ale and Rinpoche, both for inviting me to be here today. I'm really grateful for this conversation on the breath. What brought me to the body? My practice of the Dharma. And initially, I think I started out in my 20s as a very body curious person. I'd been dancing my whole life, modern dance, ballet. And then in my 20s, I took up yoga. At the same time, I was also getting more and more deeply into the practices of Vajrayana and Himalayan Buddhism, the Dharma. And I actually thought in my 20s that I was going to have to make a choice between the mind and the body, that just the way that my teachers at the time were talking about the mind was, the mind is essentially the Buddha, and the mind is what will liberate us, these kinds of phrases. And at the same time, my yoga teachers were saying the body is going to liberate you. The body is the answer. And I felt like I was on this course where I just had to make a choice. And so I chose Vajrayana Buddhism and felt like I was leaving the body behind. But little did I know that actually the body is very much a part of liberation within the tradition of Buddhism as well. I think I went away from the body for many years, and then my own practice of the Dharma. As I got deeper and deeper into the practices of Tibetan Buddhism, it brought me back, or Himalayan Buddhism, it brought me back again home to the body. And right now, that's the place where my practice is alive. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to transmit to others what was so exciting to me about practicing with and through the body, taking the body as my teacher.
Great. Thank you. And, when I hear you, it reminds me of the thought of the breath being the missing link, right? That you don't have to choose body or breath or mind, that by choosing breath, you're choosing both. And I think that's what you do wonderful here in both in your life as well as how you express it in your book. So thank you. Mario, same question. So what brought you into this wonderful work? And I know, maybe some turns in how you came to it.
Well, my grandfather was an engineer. My mother wanted me to be an engineer. So when I was a child, I would say, I'm going to be an engineer. That was it. That's the mindset that you create. So, but my mind wasn't working as an engineer. So I went to school, went to University of Madrid for a while, and I tried engineering, and it was terrible. So I came back home and I said, look, I didn't do well in engineering. I don't want to do this anymore. He said, okay, do anything except psychology. I said, okay. So parents can teach you the opposite sometimes. And so I went back to school and I studied psychology. And then culture was a very interesting process also. You learn things and you store them in your mind, not knowing that it's going to be a crucial thing in your life. So we were living in New York. I'm Spanish French. I have dark hair. So I was living in an Irish German neighborhood, and I didn't fit as well. So again, one day I was tired of. I didn't realize that there were some differences in cultures and so forth. So I said to my mom, "Look, I think I want to dye my hair blonde," and she said, "Do it if you want to look like a clown. That's all right." But that was it. Those in one place you're okay, in another one you're not. So culture became something that I really, really wanted to understand. And then I had the opportunity to work with some really great people who taught me psychoneuroimmunology. George Solomon, who was the founder of psychoneuroimmunology, and then cultural anthropology became a very important thing for me. So I brought neuropsychology together with anthropology and neuroscience. And basically, the way I look at it is that the world is out there for infinite interpretations, whatever it is. And the culture weaves a fabric around the world, and we see that fabric rather than some universal world which doesn't exist. But then our biology responds to how we perceive that fabric. It doesn't respond, even our circadian rhythms and even our time. It's the time that we perceive. Like the work that I do with the centenarians, they have a way of perceiving time differently, and that affects your biology. So your phenomenology, your mind, body, spirit, or whatever you want to call it, is what biology responds to, not to some external universal thing or some biochemical process external of anything else. So we're incredibly connected with the ecology of mind and body and culture, of course. So that's the story.
Thank you.
Maybe your parents should have told you to become a psychologist. Then you will become an engineer.
I'd probably be a mediocre engineer now. That's right.
Rinpoche, I was thinking, I mean, every time with these dialogues, of course, you share different bits of the story of your wonderful life story, and I know people love that. So I wonder that hearing Willa and Mario, if any particular part that you want to share on your wonderful path to where you are today.
Well, I will not say so much. I'm more interested to hear our speakers here. But recently I was in Nepal for 5 weeks, and when I came back, I felt a little interesting experience that, culturally speaking, as Mario talking about cultural part, that if you're in India and Nepal, you're allowed to do nothing. You're allowed to be not busy. You're allowed to be lazy. You're allowed to enjoy your life. Allowed to, you don't have to. Yeah, it's just kind of some sense of that freedom, cultural freedom, which biologically, in the deep inside, you do feel like, okay, I mean, even though I was still very kind of westernized and being very practical at trying to take care of everything here before I go to Nepal. So then I do have free, that I can really say I'm free, be with my teacher, be close to him, and so on. But when I came back, very frequently when I came back to the West, I notice something that, it's and of course, generally speaking, I'm free. Luckily, I can be as busy as I want. I can do nothing if I don't want to spend with the family. Freedom that I have, I'm very fortunate. But I felt there is some sense of up in the air. There is a social, cultural pressure that we don't really, it's not very obvious. If somebody asks you, what do you do? If you said nothing, it's a problem. What are you doing today? Nothing. It's a problem. And now you notice that everybody around, even though they're not productive, they're not doing nothing, but everybody have to be doing, you have to pretend to be busy and pretend to have no time. And that some deep sense of this hidden pressure that we all feel, it does something to our body. Your body does not feels right. Your body feels like a pressure. Your body, even you smile, you don't smile in the same fullness. Even you breathe, you don't breathe the fullness. And that I think is very interesting to, I'm sure probably when we're talking about the longevity can be learned, or it has something to do with the belief or culture of pressure. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, and it reminds me, walking in the hallways of MD Anderson Hospital, and whenever you meet someone, if they say, "How are you?" you have to say, "Oh, very busy," because that's the culture. If you say, "Oh, I'm doing well," really, So, and actually, I have a friend who didn't get a raise, not at MD Anderson, somewhere else, because his boss saw him always smiling. He said, "You probably are not doing enough," right? So this, I think you're totally right about this culture. So let me come back to breath a little bit. And Willa, when I was responding a little bit to you, I put my idea of the breath being this link, and wasn't exactly what you said, but I wanted to ask you more about why is breath important to you? You mentioned why body is important and why mind. What about breath? Why is that important? And so if you can tell us more.
Yeah. Well, I was first, this word, breath, in our Western context, we think of breath as being respiration, the inhale and the exhale. But from a tantric perspective, from a yogic perspective, from an Eastern perspective, there's more than one kind of breath. There's also the same word, lung, right? The same word that used for respiration often, lung, is also used to describe energy. And so for me, breath, even the idea of breath, is larger than just respiration. Breath has to do with flow, with the flow of oxygen in and out of the lungs, but also the flow of energy around the body. And that this idea that we have that breath is just a lung experience is actually very limited. And even the physiology of that, it doesn't hold up, because every cell in our body is experiencing respiration. Every cell in our body is breathing. There is flow and energy exchange in every single atom of our body. So breath, when I think of breath, it has more to do, not so much with just this, although that too is deeply profound and important. I could talk about that in another way, but just to say in general that for me, breath is a big concept that has to do with the flow of an exchange of energy with our environment. It is what helps us realize interdependence. It's what helps us realize that the body isn't limited by the skin, that we are actually in this constant flow of interdependence with our world, and that we can rest our minds in that exchange and start to see the world in a different way, not as this separate self that it exists in the world, but rather a world that includes the self.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm still breathing and taking in. Mario, I remember when we were at Blue Spirit and you were talking about the importance of breath in your work. And some of the things that touched me deeply was how you connected the breathing, as Willa says, there's different kinds of breathing. And you were talking about how we breathe in a particular way for each one when we are, for example, during a trauma or revisiting a trauma, and how we breathe in moments of restfulness, or this moment, like Rinpoche was saying, this being free, and how to work with that. If you can share with the audience that, which was a wonderful way of talking about breath, that is kind of unique.
Well, it's important to remember that breathing is the only system that you have that's autonomic and voluntary. And the nature doesn't do things randomly. If it's voluntary, we should be able to do something with it beyond exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so the Eastern thinkers picked up on that very early, the Indians and the Chinese and the Tibetans, that there's something you can do with the breathing. There's something that beyond just breathing. And you can't kill yourself. Where a child will say, I'm not going to breathe anymore. You can't. There's going to be an override that you have to breathe. So it's powerful stuff. But what it does is it allows, as you were saying, mind and body to come together. And the other thing that we know is that the thinking before was that you store memories and you have a cognition of the memory, and that's it. You bring it back, and then you get upset or happy because of the memory. And it's not like that at all. We store a cluster of what was going on, the psychoneuroimmunology of what was going on, the breathing pattern of what was going on. So when you bring it back, you bring in the whole cluster in, and that then becomes your now. That's bad with bad things, but it's good because you can also you can change processes by doing things like that. So a context will also be very, very important in breathing. You go into one particular place and your breathing will change because you have memory. In this context, I have to be alarmed, or in this context, I have to be in tune with myself or whatever. And being aware of those things then allows you to see what your breathing is doing. And for example, people that have hypertensive people don't breathe very well. Essential hypertension, they don't breathe very well. They don't get enough of the oxygen, and many other kinds of problems. But one of the ways that I use it, and people think at first that it's just going to be an exchange of oxygen, but it's more than that, as you know better than anyone. If you have an obsessive thought, and that obsessive thought is going to have some kind of breathing. Usually it's going to be shorter and it's going to have a little faster. And you just can't get rid of that thought. Very simply, you stop and you breathe deeply in and out 5 times, the thought will go. It'll go. Because not only are you disconnecting from the thought, you're disconnecting from the contextual creation of the breathing pattern of the thought, but you're also then tuning into mind-body. You're becoming one in the world, as you were saying, Willa. And when you become one in the world, then everything goes. Even with obsessive-compulsive people, I do that. And it's very powerful, and it's very simple. 5 times is all it takes, no more than that. And so there are many, many things with the breathing. But the other thing with the breathing that I do is I try to use, when you do one-pointed meditation, just to get your mind quiet, you can go anywhere. You can have a mantra, a mudra, but what I do is I have people go into one-pointed meditation and by basically breathing from the heart, as if they're breathing from the heart breathing. And by doing that, you're getting the one-pointed meditation that quiets the mind. But if you imagine that you're breathing from your heart, although you're not, your brain and your heart go into coherence within 5 minutes. The what's called the heart rate variability in between beats and brain waves come together within a few minutes. So you have the added value of not only the one-pointed meditation, but you also have the heart breathing, which puts coherence between mind and body and heart and brain. So those are just some of the examples of the applications.
Wonderful, thank you. Rinpoche, I know that breathing has been such an area of your both experiential and textual investigation and deepening. And recently, actually, in the spring retreat, you were teaching on the 9 lung, on these 9 aspects of breath that go all the way from internally to the eon, to the external. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that might inform what both Mario and Willa are talking about?
Yeah, thank you. So just reflecting, hearing Willa and Mario, so just makes me think that in Tibetan tradition, we say uk. Uk means the breathing, right? But then we use term lung. We talk about the like a wind or the prana, the energy, but they are used differently, right? So obviously, breath is very important. If you don't breathe, you die right away. But if you don't breathe right, you don't die right away, but you die sooner. If you breathe right or better, maybe you live longer. So, but somehow, breath definitely impacting the mind definitely impacting the breath. But beyond both, but there is also some sense of perception of self, that uh, like you in Nepal, you can be lazy. It's okay. I'm lazy. It's fine. Hey, lazy. Hi. How are you? Nobody get offended. Or here you say, as Alex said, so what are you doing? Not nothing. Okay. Well, I don't want to hire you if you don't doing nothing. So cultural perception of self that I think also plays seems like very probably what Mario in your research. I guess when you talk about the culture or um, and the longevity can be learned has something to do with the culture also. So uh, that I think seems like important to address the perception of self influencing how it influences the mind, how it influences the breath. What does the mind influence the breath more, or the breath influences the mind? That how the each one of them influencing each other, but in the core, which is the more responsible for influencing each other? To trying to be a little bit more think about it seems like I think it's important. And yeah, also in Tibetan tradition and in Vajrayana, one of the things they say is they say lung sem tawa, like the subtle wind and subtle mind. One of the highest achievement will be when the subtler's mind and subtler's wind, when they unify together, or when they become one in the central channel, and that's the greatest kind of achievement. So that is where the longevity can be developed. That is where the health, well-being, awakening, enlightenment, many transformations can be achieved when these subtle wind and subtle mind both meets in the central channel. So some sense I think would be good to know from the science point of view what is that subtle wind and subtle mind is, rather than just saying a breath and the breathing, just the breathing and just the mind. So I think yeah, that's all what I think for this moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Mario, did you had any ideas in how would science define that subtle wind and subtle mind?
It'd be very difficult because I think what happens is that we think that the only thing scientists, Western scientists, that the only thing that is real is what you can measure. And there are many more things that you can measure. They say, oh, you can measure a thought. No, you cannot measure a thought. You can measure what a thought is doing with the neuromaps and all that, but you can't measure that. And one of the reasons is that it seems like thinking and phenomenology and the subtle processes that you're talking about are more quantum than Newtonian, in the sense that they don't go linear. They have non-locality and they have other kinds of processes that actually are not measurable with Newtonian equipment. But that there are other ways to indirectly identify, for example, some of the work that Richie Davison has done with some lamas that have been doing the things that you do, Rinpoche, and they find that they go into levels when they're in that subtle mind. They go into levels that sometimes are not measurable, but you can see things that are going on in the functional MRI that the neuroscientists don't know why it's happening, but there's something there. So what I'm saying is that the closest you can get is you can get correlations, but not the thing in itself. Would be the way, and it's good to have correlation because then you can train with some kind of visual feedback and things. But we see. I think what's happened is that science, biology has borrowed, in order to become legitimate, it has borrowed physics, and in physics you have entropy that goes from order to disorder. So in aging, for example, they say, well, as you grow older, the entropy would be you go from order to disorder and you deteriorate. But in complexity theory, it's different. Complexity theory is more for living beings, and that goes from simple to complex. So you become more and more complex, and that makes a lot more sense. The brain of a 10-year-old is not as complex of a 50-year-old. So that would be another way to look at it with complexity theory and chaos, and there's a lot going on in the factors of time in fractals and things like that, which are really interesting. But yeah, I think it would be correlational, the closest that I think we could get.
Thank you. And before I get back to Willa, I wanted to ask you, because I think this might go into, with all this together, is that what brought you to create this biocognition? Is that why you kind of create this as a way of explaining all the things that seem unexplainable, Newtonian-wise and so forth, or am I?
Yes, no, that's right. Because science grows when you're dissatisfied with what you know. At least I look at it that way. And I was very dissatisfied with what I knew, and this isn't working. So what's going to work? So one of the things that I did in psychoneuroimmunology, I brought in cultural psychoneuroimmunology, because you can't just say what the T cells are doing. The T cells are doing depending on what culture you come from. So an example, just a real simple example. You are you're having menopause, and you have hot flashes, and the doctors will say, well, that's just hormonal changes and this and that, and we'll give you this and we'll give you that. But it's more than that, because it's a cultural component. In Uruguay and probably in Argentina too, they call it bochorno, which means shame. I'm having the shames. And we know now psychoneuroimmunologically that shame causes inflammation. If I say you're stupid, you're going to have all kinds of molecules of inflammation coming out, because the immune system is cultural and biosymbolic. So you figure, okay, that's what it is. That's just you have. But then you go to Japan. In Japan, they call it konenki, the second spring, the second chance. None of those symptoms, because they have a different conceptual presentation of biology. So those are the things that really moved me. And I thought, well, it's all in culture is basically what is important for survival and meaning, aesthetics, ethics. That's it. And the culture believes that we have about meaning and your survival.
Thank you. Willa, I was reading recently an interview that they did on you on Tricycle, and since it was during the pandemic, that was a central to it. And you spoke about this term eco-anxiety, and I thought it was great. And I wanted to, for you to give you space to tell our audience about how you came to that, and how by understanding that these practices can help you kind of reduce stress and be in a little bit in the same aspect of what Mario is doing with the cultural changes. So now moving to the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, that term just came to me because I think it was what I was feeling. And lately I've been in communities of individuals who are interested in exploring the relationship between Dharma practice and the degradation of the planet, and how can we, as a community of contemplatives, how can we bring our practice to bear on this communal global suffering? I mean, if there is one thing that Buddhism is good at, it's thinking about the causes of suffering. That's what the Buddha was all about in his Four Noble Truths. And so, and also just working with our suffering as opposed to turning away from our suffering. So in that context of being around the issue more than I had in the past, the last 10 years or so, I've been on a council called the Council of the Uncertain Human Future, which is a group of humanists and climate scientists and people of all walks of life, just sitting in a circle and talking about what this brings up for each of us, and what do we see as the way forward? How are we going to live for the world that we want to see? So in myself, just leaning more deeply into the issue, I was noticing the deeper I lean into the issue, the more I hear the truths of what is actually happening to our planet and the predictions of what will happen soon. I found myself experiencing anxiety, a particular kind of anxiety, eco-anxiety, anxiety about my future, the future of young people, the future of our species, the future of the plants and the animals. And that's a big anxiety, because I'm not just feeling it for my own future. My own future is very limited, right? Each of us are, we only have so long to live. But, talking about longevity, there's the human longevity. And then I'm sure, as Mario, you must have thought about this as well. There's the longevity of the planet, and the longevity of our species, and the longevity of other species. And so, in terms of longevity, starting to fear for the longevity, the mortality of all of us. So that's a big anxiety right now. Now it's not just for my own death, but it's for the death of all these other that we're starting to think about now that we're seeing what might happen. So yes, so where that's brought me is into thinking more deeply about how our practice needs to invite difficult emotions and help us metabolize them. Because unless we can metabolize our anxiety about the state of the planet, we will either turn away because it's so uncomfortable to consider, or we will freeze. Well, the 4 F's, right? Fight, flight, freeze, faint. We're gonna go down that road. We'll forget to breathe. Speaking of breath, so the breath in particular can really helps me to connect to the body. And when I'm more connected to the body, I have a greater ease in self-regulating my eco-anxiety. And in particular, that emotion can be very useful for connecting us to the heart of compassion, so that we can work or operate more from that place than we do from the anxiety. But the breath is a connector there. A breath is a connector, because when we're anxious, our breathing, I would love to hear, actually, Mario, what happens when we're anxious? My breathing gets shallow and a little rapid, but I'd love to hear from you more about that, the physiology of that. And when I notice that, sometimes the self-regulation can be as simple as getting connected to that breath and starting to invite deeper breath, invite more space. When we breathe, I am inviting space and openness into the body, and there's more room then to hold what is anxious. I'm curious, Mario, what is that?
Well, you were talking about the fight or flight, and I think that as Homo sapiens, 50,000 years at least, practicing what works, what doesn't. And what's happened is that if you have anxiety about something that is real or not, it doesn't matter. If it's a lion in your head, you're going to have a certain reaction. You're going to have cortisol, you're going to have norepinephrine, epinephrine, and those affect the breathing very much. It speeds it up and makes it quick for fight or flight. But interestingly, what it does is it also suppresses the immune system. It suppresses digestion, because the system is saying, let's take care of this fight first, and then you can bring the immune system to fight pathogens again, and you can have digestion. But we as human beings are the only ones who keep running the anxiety. The zebras will go, and after it's over, they'll eat and they're gone. We keep ruminating, keep going on. So what happens? Immunological deficiency, poor breathing, poor digestion, and all these things, because we keep rerunning an alarm that's already gone, that left completely. And so it was made for short term. When we make it long term, So that's what begins to cause the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rinpoche, do you want to? I remember in our last dialogue, we were talking about, as Willa was saying, experiencing the suffering kind of the whole world of other beings in other countries. We're talking, of course, about Ukraine and how that's suffering. And there was this part of the dialogue that is like, well, but we don't really have the same trauma that they are experiencing, and yet we can connect, and yet we can bring through our breath, through our meditation, through our mind, kind of breathing through the heart, sending that to others. So how do you feel, Rinpoche, we can help being in this difficult situations with both eco-anxiety, including all these beings suffering in Ukraine and others? What are things that we can do with breath for that or other ways?
I think it seems like a kind of really complex, right? It's the cultural fact, and it's a language, the mother language, affecting your brain and your longevity, your health. The certain different cultures, like how they relate to things as Japanese versus Argentinians, So how you see the world, right? So, but then for me, it always seems like it comes down to this perception of self. It seems like a self that you have Japanese self, you have Argentinian self, you have Chilean self, you have American self, you have a different culture, the self, temporary self that they created, or even collectively, as a human being globally, we created some sense of self. We're talking about, as Willa is saying, the anxiety, eco-anxiety, that not only our longevity, but the fear of ending the species, the world. It's in the end, either you have collective anxiety of collective survival, or you have anxiety of individual survival. In the one way, it's an anxiety. It's just basically different kind of anxiety. One sounds nicer, you're worried about more about others than yourself. One seems like a little bit selfish, you're about your longevity, but it still is a human collective anxiety. As far as the nature is concerned, it evolves. It dies. I think something else comes out. It continues to evolve, but they don't have to evolve for us. Nature evolves for its own continuation of different transformations. We don't want it to remain child all the time. We don't want it to remain teenage all the time. It evolves. You're a baby, you're a teenage, you're adult, you're old, you're dead. It's fine. One is not better or worse than the other. It's just kind of continuation of evolving things, one sense. I think in a Buddhism, when we talk about eternity, or even a longevity, idea of longevity, that concept of longevity exists. But the ultimate sense of longevity, they don't talk so much only about the body. They don't talk about their realization, who they are. It's eternal. Who you are is eternal. You never die. There's a continuation of existence that you have. But if you're focused on your identity, it's your body, then body does changes. And more you worry about it, it changes faster. So it's something has to do with our own deeper sense of perception of I, And then I guess then it has so much to do with the cultural aspect of it that, for example, if something bad happens, very often people will say, if something bad happens, whose fault is it, right? In the West, immediately they would look into whose fault is it. There must be somebody did something wrong, rather than there must be some collective reason why it happens also. Like even the war, clearly, somebody take action, just make a decision, and somebody is more responsible. But then ultimately, it's not one person or few people is full responsible for things. It's a collective thing. And we don't want to admit that it's a collective thing. We wanted to point it, to narrow it down to as narrow as possible, to limit to some people. So these behavior, human behavior, I think what really changes a lot. I feel that, my trip to Nepal was just a simple example, but I think there's something very deep into it, because if my existence is threatened, if I feel threatened by something, my thoughts are different, my emotions it's more fearful, and that it affect my breathing cycle. It will affect my sleep, and it just came from somebody threatened. Then different, because of that, you have different kind of patterns of thought. You use different language, you see differently, you react differently, and then physiologically your breathing cycle changes. Then, of course, then your body is affected, your mind is affected, your breath is affected. But if there is some deeper sense of self is recognized in many ways, you don't have to practice specific breathing. You are naturally breathing right, because there's nothing preventing not to breathe right. Yeah.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you. Mario, I was going to ask you, from this biocognitive way, kind of mind-body culture, what other factors kind of unlock the blocks to happiness and longevity? And amongst those is, as Rinpoche was saying, this concept of I, right? This identity. Is that part of how we get stuck from the biocognitive perspective?
Yes, because language is wonderful, but it's very limiting. And we teach our biology to respond to the language rather than to the thing in itself. So one of the techniques that I've been using, Rinpoche, I'm glad you brought this up because it reminded me, is to teach people, we don't try to change behavior. We try to recontextualize the terrain that supports a behavior. Not because if you change one behavior, the terrain is still there. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll have people sit comfortably and close their eyes and breathe as they're breathing normally. And then I'll just say, be aware of how you're breathing now. Forget about it. Now I want you to have a little mantra of gratitude, for example. There are 4 processes that are really good psychodynamically. Gratitude, generosity, admiration without envy, and curiosity. Those create all kinds of psychodynamic, serotonin, endorphin, oxytocin, dopamine, all of them. So, but what I want to do is to get into the pristine level of the terrain. So I'll have them think gratitude. The word gratitude, nothing associated with gratitude. Just gratitude, body, gratitude, body, gratitude, body. No association. How are you breathing now? And what they notice is that breathing becomes very coherent with the terrain that they're experiencing. So they're living a pristine terrain of gratitude. Then when they get gratitude language-based and all that, then it's like you have the fertilizer for it to grow. So that's just a simple example. And the idea is to really get away from language, because language is very limiting. And as you were saying, Rinpoche, the selfhood has to be something that is undescribable, ineffable, and yet it's experienced. So that's one of the things that I'm doing lately now, with getting to and also the pristine gratitude. But what's interesting is that the immune system is quite intelligent. I do a workshop called "Does the Immune System Have Morals?" And it does, in a sense of goodness. If you, for example, if you look at somebody and you smile, and that person smiles back, you have oxytocin, which is a way of connecting. It's a neuropeptide that connects. But if you do it here, we're doing it here now, it doesn't have as much oxytocin, because it can tell that that is not person to person. But the other thing, this is the most important thing that I found so far that I want to share. This is the latest research. Aristotle and many other thinkers have thought that the hedonic life is not enough. He called it the hedonic life is not enough. And then he called it eudaimonia. which is as you know, the having pleasure in service, meaning, and purpose, service, and meaning. So lately now, and Rinpoche, this is one of the ways that science can begin to look at these things that you were talking about. They thought, okay, why don't we give a psychological test to see who's hedonic and who's eudaimonic? And then we're going to test something really, really specific in the immune system. I mean, just micro. There's something called CTRA, which is a set of genes that we have in our immune system that fight, that they're antibody, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory. And they measure the CTRA of both. They looked at the CTRA of the hedonic and the eudaimonia. People with eudaimonia had better CTRA, which means it's a conserved conserved transcriptional response to adversity. So during adversity, people who live the eudaimonia, who live basically the Buddhist life, have better CTRA than other people. That's amazing. And the interesting thing is that both people subjectively had the same level of pleasure. The immune system could tell the difference, but people couldn't.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that was the word. Yeah, go ahead. No, finish.
You just can't bottle that. So that's why, who knows about it in some obscure journal? And me?
I think Barbara Fredrickson also was researching on that as well, and
yes,
and it's wonderful.
But I think maybe the question about like how we're going to change everything. I mean, a culture. Like every culture has a long history of developing their own language, their perception of self. What the world is. It's not like hundreds of years that they have been living that life. And suddenly we're saying, okay, the way you've been thinking is wrong, the way you've been feeling is wrong, the way you've been talking is wrong. If you want to live longer, let's change everything. How are you going to do that?
Well, that's a great question. And that's what I'm working with. That what I found from centenarians is that they all have their cultures. There's some in Sardinia, Okinawa, and Costa Rica, but they have some universality. They're outliers. They have a universality of way of looking at the world. So what we try to do is to teach people, okay, this is the culture that you come from, but basically that culture is a fishbowl. You're in a fishbowl and you don't know that there's anything beyond that. So why don't we look into the portals that are created? For example, the portal of middle age that doesn't exist. You're middle-aged. Yesterday you weren't middle-aged. Today you're middle-aged, and you have to dress middle-aged and get sick like the middle-aged. Well, it's just a construction. So we teach people to live portalless, ageless, and in a way like outliers with these kinds of things, eudaimonia and so forth. And they do it because they know that they have some wonderful things that the culture taught them, but there's some things that are no longer serving them well. And that there's another way. And the other way, the proof is there. These people not only live long, but they're happy and they're healthy. And it's not about living long. I want to be around for a long time so I can find out the new discoveries and new ways of service. Because if you want to live long,
maybe like as you were talking earlier about menopause, so you can say all the Latin culture, just take out from the dictionary their word for the menopause. Use the Japanese version of the language,
and that's what we're doing, and it works. I'm working with women from these cultures. You're absolutely right, and they change the concept, but they have to first go back and see what they learned at a mind body level, how they learned it, and how to change it, and they begin to change the symptomatology. And the other interesting thing is that you pass these things on epigenetically from one culture to another. People who have been in concentration camps and survived 2 or 3 generations later, they have the same level of cortisol transferred epigenetically, not in a DNA way. So those things are really important. We got to be responsible for ourselves, but what we learn in our environment, we're passing on to the next generation.
Yeah, and partly of that language is that, for example, in Spanish, there is the word menopausia, but kind of the slang word is bochorno, right? And that's the one that. So
it's a shame.
Changing that, yeah.
And even doctors will say she's having the symptoms of shame, even though they know it's a hormonal thing. So medicine is a culture too. Medicine it's totally cultural, and they say, well, okay, look. An infection is an infection. You have a pathogen, and you're going to have to take some antibiotics, and it's all the same. No, it's not the same. you are from here and you know that they're pathogens and you know that you take an antibiotic and it's going to help you. But if you're in the Amazon and some shaman tells you in that wound there's a spirit that went in and it has to be exorcised, no amount of medication for the pathogen is going to work. The antibiotics are going to tremendous amount of antibiotics in order to work. So again, the biology follows the culture rather than the other way around.
Thank you. Willa, I want to come back to you, with this idea that Mario was saying, it's the terrain, how we change the terrain, and kind of like, as you were saying, not only the eco-anxiety, but the ecosystem, and how in the same way that we can get into the eco-anxiety, we can get reverted, right? As Mario was saying with biocognition. So what are your thoughts of using it? Okay, we notice the eco-anxiety. Now we have all these tools from all these different traditions. Can we bring them back? And so one, I want to ask you theoretically, but maybe you can lead us in a practice as well.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Alejandro. I so appreciate what Mario was describing as essentially finding meaning. How we find meaning really changes our physiology. And I was thinking about, before I get to the eco-anxiety, as a woman who has gone through menopause, that actually the practices of the Dharma helped me reframe my own symptomology in a way that helped me relax a lot around the symptoms. Like, for example, the heat, right? The hot flashes at first, the first couple of times that started happening. I'm saying this also for all the women out there undoubtedly on this call who've been through this or maybe going through it. Framing it as, oh no, this is the end of how we frame it in our culture. Now it's the end of your child rearing years. It's the end of your youth. It's the end, we just have this obsession with youth and with beauty associated with our age. And how how Buddhism helped me reframe it was, oh no, this is becoming Vajrayogini. Her tumo, her heat, her fire. So now what's happening here is the tumo, and it's the energy of her. And that helped me reframe it for myself as a meaningful experience when it would arise, meeting the symptoms with gratitude, like, oh, this is great. This is heat. Heat is fine. Heat is good. Heat is not pathological. Heat is in the practice of some practices of Buddhism is a fruitional experience, and could I relax into this as something good? So I just wanted to just make that nod towards the cognitive reframing from my own personal experience. But yeah, the same can be done with eco-anxiety. How we frame our anxiety when it arises makes all the difference as to whether we can metabolize what we know and the truths that we know, so that we can be more effective in our activism or in our being a friend or an assistant to others. So I thought, yeah, why not? Let's do a very brief practice on this. I imagine many of you here experience eco-anxiety. Those of you who are here on the call, and or else just anxiety that's arising in your own life because of the conditions of your life. Sometimes it's because we know the condition of the world, the war, whatever. Now, usually when we hear a word like anxiety, we just think, okay, I want to turn away from that, suppress that. I want to meditate around that. I want to meditate myself out of that experience. But actually, when we try to meditate ourselves out of anxiety, the anxiety increases its hold on us, or we suppress it temporarily and meditate around it, but it will come up again. So why don't we try something briefly together? around anxiety, because it is a universal. We all have some of it, some residues of it in our lives. So why don't we just take a moment to, in just a short practice, to come down first from the thinking mind into the feeling body. One of the things we notice right away is breath, the body breathing. And we'll take a moment now just to call to mind, actually invite the residue of what we're anxious about today, and or what we're carrying. Whatever the feeling is. It might be anxiety, it might be depression or sadness, irritation, fear. We all have some residue of feeling that we bring when we slow down and come into the body. So whatever you notice, whatever feeling, just seeing how that manifests in your body. Where it manifests, maybe in the heart or in the belly. Maybe in the shoulders, in the face. And just welcome now that feeling to be present, not asking it to go away or trying to soothe that feeling, but instead breathing deeply, space around your anxiety or fear or depression or sadness or irritation or anger, whatever it is, breathing deeply and surrounding that feeling with space and openness. And as you exhale, exhaling space and openness, and just breathing space around your beautiful feeling. Just a brief, nice. Thank you. Just a brief practice. Yeah. It's one way that I like to use the breath, is to make room, make space for what's there.
Thank you, Willa. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Rinpoche. Before we close, anyone else? Any last words? I have a few things in closing, but
I'm going to mention something that you said, Willa, that it's very creative about Tumo with the And that's interpretation. The attribution that you give is so important to the biology. And the Japanese women, when they feel, oh, this is wisdom coming in. Oh, this is a libido coming in, and they completely recontextualize the condition like you did. Sometimes you could just sit in the snow and just melt some snow when you're having a little tumo there. But that's very creative. It is very, very in tune with what they do in Japan. That's the universality of the things that I was talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Great coherence there. Rinpoche.
Yeah, so thank you, Willa and Mario. It was fantastic conversation. Always good to reflect and share and think, and there's always something to learn. Always realize how much we don't know, how much there is to be known. So it's always helpful. And just wanted to say, all the audience here on the 30th, I think it was the 30th, right? April.
Yeah, 30th at 11 a.m. New York time.
30th, 11 a.m. We have 6 teachers from 6 different schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and quite learned teachers who all will be speaking about maybe 6 sessions throughout a couple of months on 5 wisdoms. So the first one will be kind of overview of the 5 wisdom. Each teacher, unfortunately, there will not be so much time to do that, but at least everybody will be able to kind of give their essential points about the 5 wisdom, and then next one, each wisdom conversation will go on 5 sessions. I think 3 dates we already have, the rest we don't. Then I know, like sometime, these traditions, conversations kind of very different, the conversation that we are having here versus then when they were talking about the 5 wisdom based on the text will be quite different kind of conversation. But I was hoping, I'm trying to organize in a way, trying to see, to have fewer people or fewer teachers to then follow up that 5 wisdom, like wisdom of emptiness. What does that mean for mundane people? How you look at that from personal point of view? How you can apply that experiential meditation? How you can give examples of our ordinary life, or how my wife will understand, or how even my teenage boy will understand something. So I'm trying to think to bring different teachers there to have some conversation. So I'm very excited about it. So I'm inviting all our Cyber Sangha members to join. And in fact, I will be teaching in Vienna about 5 wisdom. So particularly those who will be joining there, I would recommend highly to attend these teachings. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Willa, for all and that beautiful practice. Thank you, Mario. And thank you, everyone. As you see, we're going to continue doing a lot of these different kind of dialogues. And that's the idea of Cyber Sangha, to really explore in different ways, both through body, breath, mind, and heart. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Milos, for hosting. And thank you, the whole team.
Everybody.
Thank you very much.